Good afternoon, nerds. Just kidding. I don't know. I just wanted to start the podcast that way. Trisha Curtis, the legend, one of the celebrities in the oil and gas space, CEO, founder of PetroNerds, international traveler, speaker, expert. How we doing today, Trisha?
We're doing great, and you're making me blush. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's an honor to have you on. So, going way back, right? I guess really to basically COVID days, Digital Wildcatters was tiny. You had a podcast on that. I had a podcast on that. Small group of people. Think maybe I met you in person once, but obviously followed you. You do a great job putting out content in the oil and gas space. And then we ran into each other in Boston at the AAPL show, had a chance to talk in person, which I don't know if we'd ever really done. I'm like, how have you not been on my podcast? 157 episodes, you haven't been on. So super excited to have you on today, Trisha. And I'll just ask you the question, get right into it, that I ask everybody. Who are you? Who is Trisha Curtis?
Well, that's a pretty broad question, and it's great. And I do get feedback when I was going through your questions. I thought, man, there are a lot of people in the industry that say we don't know anything personal about Trisha Curtis. It's all super professional.
Right.
Which, if they listen to the Chuck Yates podcast, which I was on, there's a little more involved in there. But that usually there was some wine and some alcohol involved with that one, given it with Chuck Yates. But yeah, no, I really appreciate being on the podcast. It was awesome to see you in Boston and actually catch up in person because we've crossed paths a few different times. But who I am. I mean, I live, eat, and breathe my business. So as most people know, like I love it. I'm passionate about it. But I'm pretty passionate about everything in life. And so if you're going to be on this earth, like give it your all. And that's sort of how I feel. I am extremely blessed to, and I think you're in the same camp of running my own business. And, it's not always great. It's not always easy. I've been through a lot since, really in my 30s. I've been through quite a bit of volatility, oil prices, and COVID had a lot to do with that.
Yeah.
But, and I won't say business is everything to me, but it's a big part. Like I think the oil and gas industry and this space and what I do, because I love it. And that's really how you create a successful business. It's got to be a part of you. I mean, no one looks at the big tech founders and you don't think they live, eat, and breathe it. I mean, they definitely do. But no, I mean, I have a personal life. I have I'm very, very close with my family. But I would say that, and I'm complimented by it, but my niece has described me as, opinionated, caffeinated, and passionate, and just sort of always full of energy. And that's me kind of all the time.
Yeah, it is. So I want to go back. Like I think you're like a farm kid from Colorado, right? Isn't that your upbringing?
Yeah, so I say very commodities focused because so I grew up on the border. I was born in Cheyenne and in Wyoming, so I still claim Wyoming, but we had a ranch in Southwest Wyoming, outside of Baggs, Wyoming. And so my dad, my grandfather just kind of a fun ranch for him, but my grandfather, my dad's side, pumped oil wells all throughout Wyoming. My dad pumped oil wells. So we chased every oil and gas boom in the Rockies. And then on my mom's side, my grandfather was a wheat farmer, a dryland wheat farmer outside of Craig, Colorado. So that was wheat, and then everybody else was in coal. So it was oil, wheat, or coal. And so, yes, happy and proud, proclaimed country girl. And, we went to school in Craig, Colorado, but we spent a lot of weekends on the ranch and a lot of work. And I am truly, might have complained when I was having to do it, but really, really grateful for that work ethic and drive because it served me very, very well.
Yeah, no, I bet. And that's like a really fascinating way to grow up. Like, so I'm from the middle of nowhere in the country in New Hampshire, and there's like a ton of farms out there. And it was always viewed as like the people who worked on the farm, like they always had jobs in the summer, but they were the hardest jobs, right? It was hot. You're out there, you're doing whatever people do on the farm. I don't know. I was busy like waiting tables and doing like easy jobs like that. But I always had like a great deal of respect for these people who did work on the farm and own farms and maintain them, especially in the summer, because then you had your bounty and they had farm stands and all that fun stuff. So for you, it's pretty cool. Like a background of obviously oil and gas, it's in your blood. So you had like a real firm understanding of energy. And then to continue that, you also had this like wheat side of things. So like you really understood the earth and the abundance and everything that it could give and provide to you. Grew up in Craig, small town, right? Craig's where you're from.
Yep.
Where'd you go to college?
Well, that was the big kicker for wanting to work in actually oil was I went to school at Regis University here in Denver, Colorado, got a
That's
full
cool.
scholarship, and so that was sort of the sealing the deal because it was like winning the lottery for my family. So this is a small private Catholic school, and it's a teaching university. So Lord only knows what it costs now, but at the time it was probably like 40,000 a year when I went, and I
Yeah.
had a full scholarship. But it was a really good for a small town country girl. Like I was pretty nervous about going to college and going to a big school, but I loved learning. And wow, it was truly the opportunity of a lifetime because I dug right in. But it was my first economics class, like day one in college. Like I really, I had no idea that I liked Shakespeare, and I was in English, and like we're acting out Titus Andronicus with swords, and I thought this is incredible. And then I thought this is awesome. And then like day one, I also take economics. In my first economics class, I just fell completely in love. And I'd grown up like watching the stock market. I mean, we had CNBC and Squawk
Hmm.
Box on, and we had that, we had the stock market on since I was 9 years old. So I was fluid with the stock market at a young age and knowing what was going on in the world. And then taking this first economics class, I remember them talking about, well, supply and demand, but like oil is a hard one because you can have supply and demand, but then you have all these geopolitics and all these things. And I thought,
Yeah.
oh, this is really hard. I like this. And so then I was pretty interested in Russia and China, and just kind of I thought I really like this, and it was a nice thread, and like it helps that I grew up around it, and I thought this is a completely different angle, and it seemed really difficult, and I like things that were hard, so I just went after it.
Yeah, like one of the things that I really enjoyed about it must have been at least an hour, maybe longer, that you spoke at the AAPL show in Boston. Like I didn't know what to expect. I know that you're a wealth of knowledge. You love oil and gas. You work with all different types of companies, governments. You do international work. I I was really impressed by the emphasis that you placed on the international factors that play into making up like the global energy economy. And that was a viewpoint that I feel like I don't hear a ton of. But what about that is so interesting to you, right? Because you were talking about things like what happens in China then actually has a ripple down effect here, and then supporting it with math and quantitative, metrics and numbers. Is that something that you just love about the oil and gas industry and the energy industry as a whole? Is looking not just at domestic upstream drilling, but the impacts that one decision or move will have thousands of miles away on what can happen over here.
Well, no, I mean, I love all of that because I think, knowledge is power. And so I say that a lot, but it's like the more more is more. So when like I onboard a client or something, I'm like, are you ready for 200 slides? Are like, that's what you're getting, and they're like, what? And I'm like, yep, that's, like you're going to get what you paid for. And then I'm going to walk you all through this. And there's a lot, but I do love, everyone always tells me, you must love numbers. And I apparently I use them a lot. I didn't realize I love them, but I do love data, and I like making things make sense to people and seeing that
Yeah.
aha. And so you have to like really comprehensively study and be able to articulate and help people pull together. So I think like, I really appreciate those comments, and those compliments. But like, yeah, global energy economy is a great way to describe it, is that there's so many, energy is one of these things that, it is the thing that underpins the entire economy, not just the US economy, but the global economy. It underpins all business. So access to energy to turn your lights on, but
Yeah.
that really extends into business, the affordability of bills, the affordability of utilities, but that transcends through across the entire planet. And so, it's very easy for people to take a certain lane and a certain vein. And because our media, the way it's focused, and market intelligence, it can be very bifurcating. And
Yeah.
so the more you dive into it, the more you learn. And I do love to, comprehensively explain the markets. And I think the China piece is, simplistically, the US and China are the two biggest economies. And that being said, they're completely different. I mean,
Yeah.
they run completely differently. But when it comes to something as simple as oil supply and demand, I mean, that matters a great deal. I mean, if you know the US market, that's wonderful, but you really do have to know the entire global oil market. And you have to be thinking about a lot of different nuances right now at play that can impact prices. So, no, I love that. And it's not because I love being a smarty pants. I love really seeing the aha and the client sort of getting it and being like, wow, that's awesome. And then, like, having this, and then, my gosh, they sound like a genius, which is fantastic. But like, I love working with companies that uh, they're drilling and producing for oil. They do not have time to be up at 2 in the morning looking at what's
Totally.
going on in the Asian market. So yeah, I really enjoy helping businesses and seeing that success.
So that's a perfect segue, and I do want to get into all the personal stuff because we're not just going to make this a pure oil and gas and numbers and economic conversation, which I know you can talk about forever. But like, what is PetroNerds? What led you to starting this company? And fundamentally, like, what do you do? What is PetroNerds?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you're getting back into business, but we'll start with a business, then we'll go back into
Exactly.
PetroNerds. I mean, so really it came about. I was working in Washington D.C. and I was at a think tank, and I think someone had I got in the weeds a lot. I was cut my teeth on U.S. shale. So I
Mhm.
was cold called every organization in D.C. to get a job out of the recession, and I ended up at this small think tank and called the Energy Policy Research Foundation. And I was, deep diving into Canadian oil sands because I was working on Keystone XL, and I didn't know anything about it. And that was at the same time, we had massive crude differentials blowing out, because the U.S. was just starting to produce oil in North Dakota, and the
Yep.
market, just like the whole system, was not working, and nobody understood this. And so I was trying to figure out, like, what even is WTI? What is Texas Intermediate? How does this make sense? And
Yeah.
then I realized no one knew this. So I'm like, okay, I've got to go, like, figure out this thing going on Cushing. And so I had to study all of it. And then I really fell in love with it. It was this endless box of studying. And so I think it was my old boss or somebody had said something like, you're a petro nerd. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's great. Like,
I
no,
love
I
it.
am. And I was like, so it just stuck. And so I had, I'd come out to Denver, like, did that business for, or worked for the nonprofit for till 2015, and was really hell bent on getting out of Washington. I think it's, people work there. I completely understand that, but it is a bubble. It is an incredible bubble, just like
Big
New
time.
York and DC are way too close together, and they just don't understand how the rest of the world lives. And
Yep.
so I did not want to be there. I wanted to get out, and so I came, and I wanted to be closer to my family. I'm very, very close to my family, and I still have family in outside of Craig. My parents are there. My sister's over the hill. My other sister's in Gillette, Wyoming. And I have some extended family throughout Wyoming. So I just want to get closer to home. So I came out to Denver, and, I talked about this in Chuck's podcast, so I can't not talk about it. But I mean, we got eloped. We had started the business together. We had worked together. And so it was talk about 2016 to 2020 and everything. The marriage did not succeed. The business did. But it was really hard from 2016, starting a business called PetroNerds, and going from a paycheck, two people on paychecks, to getting married to zero paychecks and nothing.
Oof.
Every you just I had to get contracts and do stuff. So it's a grind. Like, to me, that did not scare me at all. That's a challenge. And I was working angles and getting contracts and doing asset evaluations for companies like Anschutz that I ended up working for them later. So
Cool.
it was great. Not great for the marriage, and then so that failed with before COVID. And then COVID happened, and I was working for Anschutz Exploration, as I had PetroNerds. Was still doing that full time. Also working for Anschutz, two part time, but basically they were both full time. So working for Anschutz, and I was managing strategy and analytics, and super fortunate.
Cool.
Like, I had wanted to start an oil company, and in the powder. Thank God I didn't. And I had wanted to have my own E&P. And in that process, didn't really know a lot of the right people. I didn't have access to funds, but was going through the process of it, and did some, talking to folks in New York. And then in the process of looking for assets, I had ran into Anschutz again. And in that process, and I don't think I'm saying anything I shouldn't, but Joe DeDominic was basically kind of like, hey, if this doesn't work out, why don't you come work for us and
Sure.
do, like, strategy? And I thought, well, that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah.
So, and it was great. I had a blast, and really, I got to work on, talk about petro nerdy. I got to work on, like, actual completions, which I love, and nobody was going to let me do that, being a non-engineer. And
Right.
so I ripped apart every Turner well in the Powder River, and love that side of the business, just like ripping through stuff and being able to deep dive. That was super fun, and it was my first time working directly for an operator. So incredible experience. That fell by the wayside with COVID in 2020. I mean, I think this
Hey,
industry, it's something that people really have to appreciate how hard 2021 or 2020 was for this
oh my
industry.
God.
I mean, most of us lost our jobs. We definitely didn't make money. It was pretty negative for 2020. And it was just it was a really scary and rough time. And so for folks that stayed, I think in the industry, people have to really appreciate this, like, mentality to see through the storms. But I also grew up around the business, and I know it's a boom and bust business.
Right.
So you sort of got to live through that. But I'm going it a long way around, getting to the personal side. I mean, I like that stuff drives me. I got through it. I doubled down on PetroNerds, and exited the relationship with the ex-husband in the business. So now, it's was able to take it in full time. So it worked out. Obviously, there was a lot of pain involved there. But I mean, I'm super close to my family. You probably see my German Shepherd, who's not in the like my German Shepherd Axel, who's usually in every podcast of mine.
Nice.
So he's my baby. He's my real boyfriend, actually. He's very demanding. But yeah, I close to my family. Like to spend a lot of time with my nieces and my nephew. And I am fortunate that I do travel quite a bit for work, and
Yeah.
I like to. It's not like they're not really work vacations, but I enjoy what I do, so it works out. Love to read, love campfires. I don't mind going to the range. I like that too. I enjoy, I don't do as much as I would like to, but I'd like to get back into hunting. And yeah, I'm pretty game for a lot of things. But when you run your business, it does get time is a little squished.
Yeah, yeah, and for me, like I'm married, I've got 3 kids, so it feels like there's almost no time, and even worse, it feels like anytime I am taking a bit of a break from either of those things, it starts to pull you back. Like I should be doing
Yep.
more as a parent, or I should be doing more
Yep.
for my business. And I think one of the things
Yep.
that I enjoyed about our conversation in Boston was I was coming off of like a pretty good amount of travel, maybe not compared to you, but like a pretty hefty amount of travel in the first half of the year. And I remember asking him, like, so how do you do it? Like you're in DC one week and then you're in London and then the next week you're in Boston and then you're in Houston and then back home. Like, how do you do it? So what advice would you give to like the heavy road traveler? How does Trisha Curtis, the Petro nerd, manage all your travel and not get burned out by it?
Well, I am definitely I'm definitely an introvert. Technically, I think
Interesting.
when you look at that, those Myers-Briggs tests, I took them probably 3 times in college and maybe in high school, and I was always on the I and E, introvert extrovert, like I would land right in the middle.
Okay.
And I really appreciated when I got back from New Mexico last week. Um, people always ask, and I actually think it was Jake, Digital Wildcatters, on their podcast. He'd asked me like how you refuel, or maybe he asked me personally, and I realized I refuel by being at home alone with my dog. And I
Yeah.
love, if people know me, they know I am not a big group thing. I've always hated house parties. I love intimate groups. I want to a couple people, or I love, like I always say this, I love going out to dinner with someone because I like a one-on-one conversation. And
Yeah.
meetings with me, people always have a meeting and they put an hour. It always lasts 2 or 3 hours. We always talk a lot, but I like going deep and I like going in depth. So I recharge by, like I have to personally deep dive. I like to go through the data. I'm not sure that will ever change for me, of like, I want to see it and know it. And I think that really does differentiate me and my business, is that most people who are giving a presentation or talk, they don't do the research. And there's a big difference between the bigwigs at IHS do this, and they're going to Saudi Arabia, they're going to London talking, and they don't know the shit behind it. And that's
Mm,
that's really important, because you have to actually know the data and you have to know how it connects. And I want to know how it looks, and I want to spend time with that. And it's kind of methodical. It's almost therapeutic to like be on the road for several days, but it is taxing. And I don't have kids, so I can only imagine. I know, like, the family balancing work life balance is hard,
it
especially with
is.
family. And typically, if you have, we have 2 parents, there's a balance, right? You can ebb and flow with who's helping out more home with kids. But it is tricky when you don't have another person. No one is helping me, right? When I leave, like, no one's I everything's on me. So obviously it would be much much harder with children, but it would be easier with with a full time partner, and I have
Well,
a
that's it.
boyfriend.
That's
But
it.
it's different, right? It's like, if I don't do it, if I don't clean the house, if I don't take care of the dog, if I don't do all these things, it just doesn't get done. So it's a balance. It's obviously a lot easier because I I'm on my own. I don't have children, so it's easier on the road travel. But I would say it's a sleep. I am not a good, like, I'm a super light sleeper and I'm not great. It's like right before, like, I was so excited to get like 6 hours of sleep right before that presentation in
Oh
Boston.
my
So I was
God.
like, oh, I was like pumped to actually get a full, 6 hours sleep, because a lot of times you're just like, there's a lot on my mind and it's hard to sleep right before a big presentation. And so that's like the biggest thing. And then it's the presentations are a lot of work. And so I like last year was and I say this honestly, last year was a very, very hard year in business. If you were in the oil and gas space and you are not producing oil and pulling it out of the ground, it was damn tough. I mean,
Yes.
2023 was almost like 2016. It was one of the hardest years I've had in a long time, because everybody just said no to everything and they pulled back and they weren't spending. And this year, it's all the same things. Oil prices are the same, but there's a lot more uncertainty in the market. And I'll be
Yes.
very honest. My business does better when there's uncertainty, whether prices are low
Huh.
or prices are high. Does it hurt to have uncertainty and higher prices, because people have the money to pay you? But when I go on the road, I truly have to say I have to get paid to speak at a presentation, because I put so much time and effort in
Yeah.
that presentation, and then the prep and making it right, making it different from the previous ones. I do not do what a lot of people do. I love what Chris Wright does. I love what a lot of people do this, but I don't give the same speech over and over. I never give the same speech over and over, because I
Totally.
want to talk about what's going on. So, and I care about that a lot. I'm anal about the data being up to date. I hate if it's like stale by like the EIA data updated a week ago, and I'm like, oh, it drives me nuts. Um, and I don't know if anyone even sees that, but I do, and I want to know the numbers. And I know people
Sure.
are sitting in front of me and they're investing their time, and their time is valuable, and so I just want to give it my all. But I would say the coming home and the recharging, and you just have to have breaks. But I did, and it was summer, so like I was able to, in May, at the end of May, go home and see my family, which was awesome. I'd be with my nieces and nephews and my parents, and then and see my sisters, and then it was basically on the road. And then I went to Boston. I saw you. I went to DC right after that. And then I went to then I went home again, was in New Mexico. So it was a lot. And you just kind of you fill those recharges. So I think people always ask this, but I do think that recharge, however it is that you recharge, you have to do that. And then you get used to also figuring out how you travel, and making
Yes.
sure you can like sleep on the plane, figuring that out. There's a reason. I learned the hard way that when I was really in my 20s, why people had nice luggage. And I was like, oh, it's
Sure.
nice luggage is silly, until it ripped every time. And then I realized why you wanted something that rolled well. So I learned that stuff. But yeah, and like, you get that. I guess I get recharged by doing the introverted thing, but clearly I get a charge from being also talking to people and getting that response, and hearing the feedback. And when I was in New Mexico, it was great because I spent a couple days. I spent like 3 days there, and I got to hear and talk to all these operators and politicians and people, and it's awesome. There's so much something different from studying and looking at stuff, and that's why I always say, sticks on a map versus go out to the field and see it and feel it. It's completely different. And I am super pumped. So when people like, I am really stoked to be going out to Permian again in November. And like, hands up, you want to take me on a field tour, I'm there. Because it's just different.
Cool.
It's just completely different vibe, and I absolutely love it.
Well, there's, like always with you, you're like an onion. There's a lot to unfold right now. But there was one thing that you said that in your history, right, that stood out to me, which is you wanted to start an oil and gas company. Like, you're going to be around for a while. Is that still kind of something that you'd like to do? Or do you feel like it's too risky? Or are you just going to keep doing what you do now? Because you clearly have the both appreciation and understanding of the data and then the back office as well as the field. And you have a little bit of that like political influence based on the network that you've built. So I could see you starting and or running an EMP company. Is that in the cards for you at some point?
I would love to. If you look at the rig on my porch, I have this, like, my dad made me this little rig out of old oil field equipment. I don't know if most people
Nice.
know if it's a rig, but it says PetroNerds rig number one on it.
Nice.
Um, and I just love it. It's like my size, but I also have a pump jack that he built me that's in my backyard. But no, I would absolutely love to, and I love production. So when I had Buckhorn on the podcast and I had those guys, like, just awesome team and great people. I spent time with them in New Mexico as well. And no, I mean, I would love to be more involved in it. Like when I was working with Antuts and doing the completion stuff, I love that. I mean, everybody wants to drill and complete a new well, but you realize like the risk is really high. Risk is a lot less high on the production side, but still you have to have a massive amount of capital. And I didn't come from that kind of money. I don't have access to it. I
Sure.
came from I'm very, very proud of my upbringing and my family, but it wasn't money. It was all labor. I was the first generation to go to college. And my parents are exceptionally hardworking, but like you have to, when you're starting a business like that or starting an E&P, you have to have access to capital. The simplest thing.
Oh yeah.
And now I know more people. The answer is absolutely yes. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I am not like, I always kind of get a little bit insulted, and I shouldn't, but people say, oh, you're just a data analyst. And I think that's or you're going to like,
Ouch.
yeah, or say like you're an analyst. And I thought, well, there's a lot to, running your own business and articulating this. And clearly I am an analyst, but like, it's more like being a chief economist on deck for every company that I work for. And just having like, they don't have to pay the overhead, but really it's more like that of sort of looking through the global market. And no, I would love to translate that into whether it's, something on the side and just helping people with assets, or whether it's actually, production. I would love to be a behemoth of like stripper well production and preventing all these crazy entities from plugging and abandoning wells that are actually viable, that we should be, maintaining this production and keeping them aligned, keeping that tax revenue. And at $83 oil, if you are not babying your production right now or enhancing it, you were missing out on a lot of money.
Yeah, but right, and I want to talk about this a little bit. So to me, like I look at oil and gas primarily through the lens of technology because that's what I've been in. I've been in tech sales and marketing, upstream tech for the last almost 17 years. So one of the trends that we've seen more of in the last year and a half, maybe 2 years, is towards sustainability and ESG. And one of the concepts that companies have been thinking about or even trying to implement is the idea of plugging and abandoning a well in exchange for a carbon credit. So there
Yes.
could be some, and of course you're an economist, right? So and an analyst. So there could be some fundamental benefit to actually doing that, right? And maybe even making more money off of it. But it doesn't feel like it makes as much sense. I don't have the numbers in front of me when oil is $80 a barrel. Why wouldn't you just keep it running? Right. So curious, like your thoughts on that, because you've probably done some research on does it make sense to P&A a well and exchange it on the carbon credit market, or even if it's producing 6-7 barrels a day and you can leave it alone, which makes more sense?
So there's several different buckets of information in that you have to tease out, and that's that we did just along with the tailwinds let's be honest, a lot of it did come with the Biden administration, where
Totally.
everybody started getting gun ho about carbon credits and everything, and the energy transition push, and that all started coming together, and you started having these tax incentives. I think the oil and gas companies need to remember what they do for a living. And so when I hear public or private companies that are advocating to me for P&A, you better show me the math, because I
Yeah.
think that you have to also show me what's the alternative. How much does it cost for you to keep that well going? And it's not nearly as much as people often say. So a lot of the risk that goes with that of taking on wells that are people are concerned about is that the viability is the cost, right? Is the bonding requirements. How much is the state going to pay, and who's liable? And that's why a lot of companies will either give them away, or they just don't, or they'll P&A them. I
Mm.
really dislike that argument, because if I talk to sometimes the same company and they'll say, well, we're long oil, we're very bullish on oil prices. And I'm like, well, so if you're telling me you're drilling completing wells, then the same argument should go for, meaning you're bullish on oil, you think the market's going to demand your crude oil. But in the same, out of the side of your mouth, you're talking about P&A, you're talking about carbon credits, and you're talking about ESG and all this stuff. I'm sorry, it just doesn't compute. So if you're long on oil and you think we're going to need oil for the long term, then you should be keeping your wells viable. Now, the trouble is that a lot of these companies think it's simpler and easier to, from an emission standpoint, for
Yeah.
regulation,
Yeah.
for methane, for everything, to just either hand those off to someone else or plug them and not deal with it and work on this other production with the new facilities that capture all this methane. However, when I talk to folks, especially, and I talked to Sam Shiverick when we talked about production and stuff of what is the actual cost, they alluded to it was a lot less than people are saying, and you absolutely can do this. You can take on somebody else's wells. And you can refit, you can retrofit this. It's not nearly as much as people are saying. And by the way, I'm going to throw this up in the air. Under a Trump administration or under any administration or under state legislation, why don't we start proposing some bills where we give companies, if this is about methane, if this is about carbon, why don't we give them the incentive to retrofit all those wells, keep the production online, keep the tax revenue coming from this, and keep the production and actually capture the methane and capture the emissions and solve all the problems and not plug that well. That helps the entire economy, and that's a spiral up, level up answer.
Yeah, because the demand for hydrocarbons is not going away, right? Which to me
Right.
has always been the whole weirdest part of the quote unquote energy transition. I like to refer to it as an energy addition. Shout out Jake Corley on that, because I'm just pro energy. I have solar panels on my roof here because like I've been to poor places where like the lights
Right.
flicker and when it's windy, you have nothing, right? So I personally believe that it's like a fundamental right that people should have access to energy. So like I'm for it. I'm for all of it. And of course I'm for the environment. Like reducing methane is a good thing fundamentally, right? But I think that you make a good point. It's not let's just shut it in and leave it alone for the sake of okay, I can put it on a carbon credit exchange. It's what's the financial benefit to this? And then ultimately, if you can reduce methane and keep the well going, you should do that. Right.
Well, it's also thinking about that real GDP that I don't know if you heard I mentioned that, and I've been trying to explain that to folks a lot. Like, what is real GDP? Thinking about like one and done. That's not good GDP growth. I can get more economic growth out of keeping those wells online, providing jobs, tax revenue, getting the actual
Sure.
oil, using it at home. I mean, I study, have ripped apart the data. When everyone went nuts on the energy transition, I went through it all. It's 100% like net zero 2050, reducing oil consumption by 25 million barrels a day by 2030 is not going to happen. It's not going to happen by 2050. It's impossible unless you actually just all shut in and stayed at home. People in
Yeah.
Colorado that are killing themselves to reduce carbon emissions. I will tell you the statistic. We are less than 0.3% of global CO2 emissions, all of Colorado. So Colorado could not exist tomorrow, and we would not impact global temperatures or global CO2 emissions a single lick. So when I see everyone going around trying to plug wells, trying to shut in coal-fired power plants and kill economies and kill the welfare of humans and also like the stuff that they're actually consuming, I mean, it's wrong. And it's not just wrong, it's like it's not actually working. So I like the people, people say energy distance. I call it energy because it's actually just energy. I mean, if you want to put solar panels on your roof, great. Is that efficient? I don't know. I think there's some issue. There's a lot of technical issues with that. I'm pro energy. I love energy. I want the solar panels to be made here in the USA. I want that stuff to be mined in the US. I want it to be processed or by a friendly country, at least by an ally. I don't care
Sure.
if it's done somewhere else, but I'm not okay with it being done in China. I'm not okay with it done being forced labor. And if it's about CO2 emissions, if you're getting it from China and it's made from coal, then we're just playing whack-a-mole, which gets me to the whole point of then just focus on, what we're actually doing. And so there's so much, I say this a lot, but there's so much misinformation within the stock market and so much misinformation on
Okay.
energy and so much bias toward the energy transition over the actual data and information. And that's why you haven't seen appropriate valuation of share price performance for oil and gas companies when you have $83 oil, because they don't know how the stock market doesn't know how to value oil and gas right now in the medium term and in the long term. And if we started
Yeah.
talking more honestly about this, that I have no criticism of putting solar panels on your roof. I'm not going to do that myself, but I mean, that's like, we have to be honest about all these things. And so it's not as simple as just saying, oh, if it works for you. And I think oil companies that leaned in really hard into these tax credits and stuff, they need to be thinking honestly about what does that say about their business and what does that say about how they're actually talking to the street as well.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of good points there, and also like there's a little bit of the greenwashing component of like, well, guess what? We're carbon neutral because we bought a
Absolutely.
ton of carbon credits. It's like what?
Right.
Like to me,
Yeah.
that's just like what are we doing? Like that's not the
And that's a
point.
whack-a-mole. That's a whack-a-mole game.
It is. It is. We only have a few more minutes here because you're an extremely busy person, and I know that you have other really important things to do. What about
We've got we
politics?
got at least another 10 minutes. So keep going.
Fine. What about
Okay.
politics? Like, do you think about potentially being involved with the DOE or influencing in a more political manner? Because the way that your brain works, like you get this stuff and it's all data driven. Has that been something that you've considered in your potential evolution as a petro nerd?
So working for a government official or running for office.
Either one.
I could definitely. I think the easier thing to say yes of like working for a, I would love to work if for Department of Energy or be help on energy policy, work on energy policy. Absolutely, from both a domestic stance and an international stance, I would love that. I'd rather be an appointee, and
Sure.
certainly would love to do that. And I do spend time in Washington, and I spend a lot of time on the China issues and the international relation front. So I would love to do that. I think running for office sounds very taxing, and
Sure.
politics is extremely messy. So I'm not saying no that I wouldn't ever consider it, but I think I like to do stuff and get stuff done. So I think I would be frustrated about the inability to get stuff done as an elected official. I think I would absolutely love to work for Department of Energy or the or Secretary of State or something on an international side. I think those two levels from we have done a poor job. And I think the Trump administration did a lot of great things in terms of energy and on a pro energy standpoint in the U.S. and did some pretty great things actually with the Abraham Accords and started a stance for the U.S. to be tougher on China. But I think that, and we have really, the Biden administration sort of continued some of those things on China, has not been vocally nearly as tough on China as they should be. But really on energy has been abysmal. I mean, this is some of the worst energy policy we've ever seen in the world is
Wow.
happening in the U.S. 100%. Like when I talk to foreigners and I talk to people abroad who are, I don't care what political spectrum they're on, they're just business leaders and they're in Europe and they say, we cannot believe what is happening in the US, that you can have 13.2 million barrels a day of production and you can have an anti-oil and gas administration. It makes zero sense. And it's abysmal and it's a absolute travesty. And I would love to bring in some, intelligence to how actually the market works to a lot of these policy folks in Washington. And Washington needs less policy and more intelligence. And that would, I think, it would go a long way.
So is this, and that's really, I mean, that's a damning statement for sure. The worst energy policy we've ever had. Is this due to a fundamental lack of understanding, or is this more just of a like a posturing political playing to your base?
I think it's three things. Firstly, I'll be very honest, and if you listen to the podcast or you talk to me, I have been critical of this administration from Biden's mental faculties and knowing who is running the
Wow.
country for a long time. So the fact that we don't really know that, the fact that foreign leaders don't know that, the fact that you can't easily get in a meeting with Biden now that's being talked about, but this was clearly going on for 3 years and the media just didn't talk about it, which is incredibly wrong. That means you have a very, very biased media, but that hurts information, that hurts market intelligence, hurts a lot of things. So I think there's one that, right? It's actually who's in charge. So it means that we have a lot of young ideologues, probably a lot of people at Ivy League universities, part of very young
Sure.
people who are like, let's go do all these things. And you can see that in the policies. You can see the speech. You can look at the actual, if you go on the Federal Register, if you actually read the executive orders that Biden put in, and I encourage you to go look at some of the executive orders that Trump put in, because you can read Trump's on the Federal Register and they read to a normal person. You can read Biden's and they make no sense. They're written to a lawyer. They make no sense. And that's kind of case in point for how the administration works. But also it's not just those executive orders, which we saw with the climate change executive order 14008, like all kinds of things that the Biden administration has done, but it's also, so it's the people in charge, who's actually in charge. That's pretty unclear. And then you have a lot of people who got into office and now they want to push everything through. You certainly saw that in Congress. You certainly saw that in DC, where there was criticism of Trump and him putting a lot of executive orders in. Well, Biden went through those really, really fast. He put in more than Trump really quickly. He put in a lot
Wow.
because that's how you rule. Well, he wasn't given a mandate, right? He didn't win by that sort of sweep. So what I get frustrated with is that he was elected as a moderate, and that's how the media portrayed him. But
Sure.
they have led the country as a very progressive, very far left group. And so when you talk about things like taxing unrealized gains, like that's insane for people to think
Yeah,
about.
it is.
I get an unrealized gain and I get taxed on that. Like it's an insane way to think. So I think it's not knowing who's in office. I think it's this, excited tailwinds, these very young people like thinking we have control and this progressive, and then having a lot of opportunity to spend a lot of money and being able to spend on everything. And then there's absolutely zero people within the administration that know anything about hydrocarbons. There's an anti-sentiment. They all hate it. And so they don't know anything. So part of it's that they don't know, and part of it's that they don't want to know. And so you have a combination. And I think there's a couple people like Amos Hutchinson, he knows, but like, what's his level of influence all the way to the top? Who knows exactly? And then how do they listen, and how do they think, and who's making actual decisions? I am being critical, but that's completely unclear right now. Where does the buck stop? And if the buck stops with the man who's currently at home sleeping because he's got COVID right now, that's kind of a problem, because that means a lot of things aren't getting done. And, up until election, we still have a country to run. So it's a really, from an energy standpoint, and I saw this in DC early on, because a lot of people thought, well, the administration is going to be anti-oil, but they're going to be pro-gas. Well, I got a newsflash for you. They come up the wellbore together, folks. Oil and natural gas come up the wellbore together. So you know what? You can't be anti-one and pro another. And they ended up being anti-both. And so putting that pause on LNG export permits, and I encourage everyone to read the actual documents from the White House on those pauses, because they make zero sense. They read like a speech written to a 24-year-old trying to land a massive progressive. I don't even know if the 24-year-olds in this country are that, progressive. I didn't even talk to anyone that would understand what these documents mean, but they were a pause in it to basically just say, hey, we don't want to be in oil and gas, and we don't want to do this. So much of it was political, and it makes it very unclear to know, how much is political, how much do they actually know? And there's a balance between a little bit of both. I mean, the Secretary of Energy didn't know how much we actually demanded of crude oil. She probably does now. I don't think she's probably a complete idiot, but she clearly she's very green. She has an agenda, and you can have those feelings and you can want that, but it doesn't necessarily work in economic reality. And that is playing out in real time right in front of us, whether it's Hertz with EVs, whether it's, looking at actual companies, looking at CNBC today, there's a big article on it. I mean, electric vehicles are not panning out, even with the massive subsidies that they've had.
Wow. I mean, this is gold, and I wish we could talk for another hour, because I know you can talk. There's no question about that. But
sorry, that was a long rant. I apologize.
No, but it's all really profound stuff. Like, I want to hit you with a couple of hot seat questions before you run. So, okay. First things first, right? What advice would you give to somebody getting into oil and gas right now? Somebody right out of school, maybe they're an engineer, maybe they're an analyst. Like, what advice, what information would you impart on the early to mid 20s person getting into this industry?
So that's a great question. And firstly, I just want to say thank you for having me on the podcast, because it's fun, and I don't often get asked, I don't often get grilled on questions, but no, it's a great question. And I love talking to students, and I love talking to young people. And when I was in New Mexico, I was actually talking to somebody who had their daughter there, and the dad was telling me like, wow, it was so awesome for you to talk about energy with her. And I realized, I'm really close with my nieces, and we talk about politics, and we talk about inflation, and we talk about the economy, we talk about oil. So they're knowledgeable. But I would say for like a young person in their 20s, a lot of them don't, because of the bias in the media against oil and gas, because of the administration, because of a lot of things and the information, they just don't know what's going on. And so I would say that like, it's an extremely sexy technical business. I mean, completion, like pumping, drilling a 4-mile long lateral and being able to pump 3,000 pounds of sand per lateral foot in a 4-mile long lateral. That's an incredible technological feat. It's, 100%. And that actually shows up in the data to be able to say like, oh my gosh, we are actually producing this. You can see in the data that it's incredible. So I would say to a young person of like, if you're looking for technology and you're looking for something sexy, hard, and appealing, and an industry that I can guarantee you is going to be around for a very, very, very long time, if not forever, I can guarantee you like, this is a business you'll make money in. It's a business you're going to find really, really good people in, really passionate people. And I mean, a lot of people say this, but it is truly the people that make this business. And there's a lot of amazing businesses out there. And I think that's probably for any successful business, but oil and gas has grit. It really does. I mean, I'm a boom and bust kid. I've grown up around it, but like, the people who stick around it, they know it and they care about it deeply. And they also care about people. And most of them, not all of them, do the right thing. Just like it's about doing what's right. And, like when everyone's looking left, it's a sign to look right. Or when everyone's looking right, look left. I mean, and I don't mean that politically. I mean, like, look, if I know that the economy is consuming 104 million barrels a day oil, but everybody's telling me not to invest in it, I'm going to be investing in it because I know the economy and I know the backbone. So I would say that kids need to really think hard, and like, this is a great industry and it's going to be here for a long time, and get educated. And it's almost awesome that all your peers don't want to be in it, because this is open to you. Like, you're going to be the next CEO in 20 years from now, you know?
I can guarantee you, right? Kids that are finishing up their MBA at Harvard, Stanford, wherever they're going right now, they're not looking into oil and energy. And the people that are will have a profound advantage because they can gain
Absolutely.
expertise where there's not going to be a ton of competition for them. Final question: where can people find you? And I guess before we say that, like, give me your website, give me all like sort of the places. One of the funniest things that I've seen with you speaking was when you speak fast, right? You give a lot of information. You get to the end of your talk in Boston, right? And some like dyed in the wool oil and gas guy came up and he said, well, you talk real fast and you say a lot of stuff. So I just have one question and I need a 1-word answer. You're like, yeah, that's not possible for me. Which was so great, but it just showed like the contrast, right? You've got these like slow speaking, oil and gas people that have been in it forever, incredibly knowledgeable. So don't make any judgments about it. And then you, who's just got this motor, right? I love it. Where can people find you, your business, your podcast, all that fun stuff?
Yeah, it's funny because I remember that, and I remember telling him, which will be a forthcoming podcast, but I remember telling him, I like to break the rules, and I'm certainly not going to follow this one of like, I'm not going to give you a 1-word answer.
No way.
That's ridiculous. But no, I appreciate that. So I wanted to say one last thing, but you can find me on LinkedIn. I do a lot of, which I think you see a lot. I post my short
Yeah.
videos, and people always
Those
say,
are
well, you
great.
talk too fast. But you have to cram, like Twitter has a 2-minute like cap, or 2 minutes and 20 seconds. So that's why I cram a lot on those. But like a 2-minute video, and it does matter because people will listen to that. They'll actually read the post, and sometimes it'll get like 80,000 impressions or something. Like, so it can move the needle, and then people are aware of the work, right? And so I love that, because I try to find different formats, and all of this has just been me posting on LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, and then the podcast. Like, if you want to know about the content that we've been talking about, and I really, really appreciate you asking the great questions, but like, if you want to know about this, if you want to dive deeper, like I say this, that knowledge is power. And the last thing I want to say, when people always ask me like about the business, and I've had some people recently, like, only every now and again somebody says, well, I don't like the name. And I'm like, that's funny, because most people like love the name of my
Oh,
business.
I love it. I love it.
And it's a little tricky for a business, like working with very professional entities, but like usually they get to know me, and it's an immediate pass. But I say this very clearly, and I often end up saying this to a lot of women who are working for ESG or energy transition for an oil company, and they say something like, "Oh, why don't you think about energy nerds or something?" And I say, "Look, there's a plenty of people doing energy transition, plenty of people doing energy. Like, I'm a PetroNerd, and I'm proud of the name, but also." I knew in 2020, I doubled down on my business. I lost, I had to buy out my former partner and my ex-husband. And I said to my dad, who thought I might be crazy to double down on a business called PetroNerds in 2020. And I said, there are going to be 12 people in the world that know hydrocarbons and geopolitics, and I am damn sure going to be one of them. And
No doubt.
and I can tell you, it has not been easy, but there are very few people who really do understand geopolitics and oil and how they work together. And it means a lot to people in their business. So I'm happy to be doing it.
Love it. Well, the fastest 48 minutes in the history of the What the Funk podcast is now officially over. Trisha, you probably have some diplomat or some vice president to go talk to and pitch, but loved this. Thank you so much for coming on. Trisha Curtis on LinkedIn. She's the Petro Nerd. She rocked it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Bye.